Okay, great. I can see some people coming in. Um, yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to our talk today on how to modernize digital services to support mental health needs. This was a project that was run in collaboration by Maytech and Mace and Menter and our good friends at NHS Gloucestershire as well. We're primarily going to be talking about a project that we did called the Children and Young People's Mental Health Pathfinder. Along with NHS Gloucestershire. So just to introduce who's going to be talking on the panel today. We can move to the next slide, please, Anna. Cool, and again. Yep, so my name is Dr. Richard Byrne. I'm a lead engineer here at Maytech, and I was also a lead engineer on the delivery on the project that we're mainly going to be discussing today. I'm mainly going to be doing sharing responsibilities. I'm going to sort of run over a very quick overview of the project before handing over to the other two panelists that we've got here today as well. Liam Miller being one, who's a senior engineer here at Maytech and was also one of the main engineers on this NHS Gloucestershire project that we worked on. He'll be talking about a lot of the technical considerations and things that we put in place to actually deliver this project. And we're also joined by Kat Thackray, who's a consultant over at Mace and Menter, who led on a lot of the amazing user research and design that helped make this delivery possible as well. So to give a quick overview of how the event's going to run, just a little bit of housekeeping. As I said, we're mainly going to be talking about the NHS Gloucester Children and Young People's Mental Health Pathfinder project today. But we'd love to hear from you as we go. So once I finish my section, I'll start to have a little look at the question section and the chat box section. If you have a little look at the bottom of the screen, there's an area for questions to ask, and there's also an area for chat comments. Please use the Q&A box to ask any questions you have as we go. I'll be keeping a close eye on that throughout the talk, and I might interrupt Kat and Liam from time to time to ask some of these questions, or if not, we've got a dedicated time at the end to actually dedicate questions. That box is super useful because you can also use it to ask anonymously should you wish to. The chat box will mainly come through to us, so please use that for any suggestions or comments you have, either about the project itself or things like, hey, that's really cool, that kind of stuff. We'll be sending out a feedback link at the end, so any comments about either this project or also the webinar itself, or any ideas for future ones that you'd love to see, let us know when you get that link sent out. And just a final reminder that this is being recorded, so you will be able to rewatch it again and share it with anyone else who wasn't able to make it today. So to cover the agenda, as I said, I'm going to talk about what the project actually is, give a bit of a high-level overview. Kat and Liam are going to go in way more detail as the time goes on. Kat is then going to cover the user research and design aspects of the delivery, and then Liam's going to talk about the how we actually did it. So I'll be covering the what. Kat will be talking about the why it had to be this way, and then Liam will talk about the how we managed to actually pull it all together. And as I said, we've got some time at the end for questions there. So let's start with what the project was. From a very, very brief overview point of view, we were asked to support mental health services for children and young people in Gloucester. The project took 8 months in total, a very, very busy 8 months. User research and design, as mentioned, was led by Mace and Menter, who not only helped to map user journeys, but also work out content design and other amazing bits and pieces that you'll find out a bit more from Kat shortly. And we basically had to build, or ended up building, not only a web service, but also an accessible SMS text messaging service, primarily running off the AWS technologies and AWS backbone to help children and young people find relevant mental health services for them. There's a lot more info there on our website. We'll be sharing these slides as well, so you'll get all these links in our case study that's linked there. So what really was the goal of the system? So Gloucestershire has a wide range of mental health services for children and young people, and it covers all sorts of mental health concerns, from things like depression, food and eating disorders, anxiety, etc. So it's vitally important that these children and young people are directed to the relevant mental health services quickly and as accurately, ideally, as possible, because some services might only cater to children and young people of a certain age group, or they might actually specialize in one of these mental health concerns. So what you don't want to happen is somebody actually finds a service, gets up the courage to actually ask for the help and go down that route, and then find that actually this place isn't somewhere that can actually help them, unfortunately. So we were finding that the existing service that was in Gloucester, or the problem that NHS One Gloucester came to us with, was that the existing services were not really meeting user needs as well. There were long waiting times, and some professional services, like the ones I've got listed on the screen there, like CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, Young Gloucestershire, had really, really long waiting times and needed you to be professionally referred to them, which was just creating a huge, huge barrier to entry as well. And that meant that people were falling through the cracks. And as I mentioned, sometimes the service that they got to might not actually be right. So we ended up creating a digital service that would help signpost children and young people to relevant mental health services and essentially allow self-referrals to some of these services. And Kat will talk a little bit more about how that works later on as well. And just to point out really quickly that this wasn't a diagnosing tool. This isn't something you go onto and it tells you or tries to diagnose what mental health concern you might have. This was very much all about signposting and trying to find that help as quickly as possible. Could you have the next slide, please? So we had a bunch of considerations to follow throughout building this service over the 8 months. We primarily followed the advice to that end that's in the GovUK service manual. Some of you on this call will probably know what this is. If you not, there are links on the other slides. The GovUK service manual is great, and there's also an NHS service manual as well, which really gives you a lot of information about certain design patterns to follow, the best user flow of a system. If you've ever been on a Gov website, you know they all have the same sort of look and feel, but also how things should be asked and the sort of cognitive capacity of only asking things like one question per page or one question per screen. It gave us a lot of great advice of how to actually not only build the system, but what phases to follow as we went through. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. We also had to make the service accessible as possible to the broadest audience. So I mentioned basically having, actually I haven't mentioned this yet, but we also built a SMS text service as well as the digital service. And one of the reasons for that is that there's a user group to consider of children and young people who might not have access to their own smartphone or their own their own personal computer at home. You know, perhaps they only have limited computer time at night. Perhaps they only have access in the library. Perhaps their computer time is really, really closely monitored. So we ended up building this SMS text service that you could basically go through exactly the same process as you could on the website, but literally by texting instead, just to try and reach a much, much broader audience. The site and the services all had to be content manageable. Some services might need to be updated, waiting times, for example, or descriptions of what the service was. Maybe there were new services available. Maybe other services had to be deprioritized because they were getting a bit overwhelmed. We had to really consider what bits of the site could be managed, content managed by the team at NHS One Gloss and the clinical commissioning group there, the CCG, and work closely with them to make sure that that we provided the ability for them to do that. And additionally, we also had to follow clinical governance. Might make sense, but this is a site that's talking about very sensitive bits and pieces. We had to make sure the language used wasn't going to trigger anyone. And Kat will talk about this again in a little bit later. And we also, as well as passing your regular sort of technology checks, like pen tests and so on, we had to make sure we were passing clinical checks like the digital technology assessment criteria there as well. So really fun lessons learned of like how to build these sort of systems and what was involved in doing all of this. Can we move to the next slide, please? So yeah, following the service manual, basically we took the agile approach you see there of discovery, alpha, beta, live phases. Discovery had already been done by NHS Gloucester to a degree, so actually we came in primarily on the alpha stage, taking the lessons learned and building the service from there. And what that actually involved at each of the stages were, next slide please, Anna. So sort of taking from the discovery and the alpha, we did a lot of user research and design during the alpha stage. We explored the interoperability, so we knew we needed to send text messages. We also needed to send emails. What would we connect to? How is that going to work? We knew the site needed to be content managed to a degree. What might that look like? But what would the site and what would the services actually look like as well? So we started to build a lot of prototypes, and we actually leveraged something called the NHS toolkit for that, the NHS playbook, which Liam is going to talk about a little bit later on as well. Super powerful, super quick to start pulling and building websites and actually get that tested then with users. And we did that process all through alpha, constant feedback, constant looping on this process as well, which led to the beta phase, which essentially is more of the same, but taking the very best idea, the all those decisions that we made, everything that happened in alpha, we were able to build the site properly. And this is when we're building the thing. Constant repeat of building things, plugging things in, getting the content design signed off, testing with the users, and then just getting that constant feedback and repeating. I've got a quick demo of what the site looks like as well. Again, the link's there, and you're able to go to the site yourself after this session, should you want to. It's a video just because it was easier than trying to share different screens. This is the homepage. This is all content managed. This can be updated by the Clinical Commission Group content design team, so they can add new videos on, they can add more information that they want to. We're going into the actual support finder service itself now. Here, this is the crux of what the system was built to do. You can see this looks and feels very much like an NHS website. That all comes out of using that prototyping kit and the tools that they had available as well. And the way the system works is by going through and answering a series of questions. I'm not putting anything in here that's specific. I'm just kind of filling it in as I go. Every one of these questions, as I said, and every answer in there had to be signed off to make sure that it was, as I said, not triggering and correct and accurate. We have to check certain things like, yes, are you in Gloucestershire with your school? Is your GP in Gloucester? Because some services are only available to people who actually live or attend school in Gloucestershire as well. Certain questions might lead down different routes depending on what you've answered as well. And I mean, it's nothing groundbreaking. It's something you will have seen a lot if you've ever used a wizard or filled in a questionnaire online, especially on a Gov website. And then when you've answered all the questions that are relevant to you, click submit results, you will be presented with the list of services that match the criteria and the answers that you've essentially filled in. You can see the ones at the top, they all have like a little get started link underneath. These are the ones now that you can actually self-refer to. You can go to another part of the process after this if you think this is the right service for you and actually start that referral, which previously you would have had to go to a GP or another registered professional to do. I'm just showing you the start of that journey here for CAMS in particular. Again, this is content manageable. You can update things like the waiting time and information about what the service is on this site. And I've paused it there because I didn't want to go through and do an actual referral because I didn't want to clog up their systems. That's a really, really like whirlwind tour of what the project was and what it all looked like. So I hope that made sense. I know I had to talk quite fast with it, but do have a go on the site and have a look at it yourself afterwards. But to talk about why we had to build it that way and how we got to that point, I'm going to hand over to Kat now, who's going to talk about all the amazing user research and design that went into this. So Kat, over to you. I'm going to have a little look at any questions and stuff as we go.
Cool. Thanks very much, Rich. So yeah, I'm just going to start off by talking super quickly about who we spoke to. We spoke to 12 to 25-year-olds, was what we defined young people as. That was kind of closely working with the client in terms of who the service needs to be available to, and also what parameters they were sort of happy to conduct research within. So we spoke to the group that were going to be using this, and that formed the majority of our research because we thought it was, so important to hear from those people. Not groundbreaking at all. And we also spoke to mental health leads in schools when we were developing through the sort of that transition from alpha into beta, where we started to know sort of what we were building and wanted to know how we could build it really well. We started to get a bit more of a I hate this phrase, but a helicopter view. So people who were aware of like all sorts of different challenges that young people were experiencing and were able to tell us a little bit about how that had changed after the pandemic, because this was just sort of, we're still during the pandemic, aren't we? But, what sort of demand they were experiencing and the challenges that they had in terms of being able to refer young people to the right places was also really interesting to us. And throughout, we spoke to children and young people's mental health services. So we had, the client was the Clinical Commissioning Group, but they partnered with Young Gloss, with Young Minds Matter, and with a counselling service called Tick Plus that's local to Gloucestershire, I think, to provide a lot of mental health services. So we had all of these people with very different areas of expertise who were able to really guide us about what language to use, where to find young people to speak to, what not to say, what to worry about, and to give us that clinical view of, these young people are saying, oh, I've got this problem, they're using very different language. And we really needed help to bridge that gap into, well, what does that look like from a service perspective? So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is just when we spoke to them. So as Rich very briefly touched upon, we did a lot of research during this project. We built on a discovery that had been conducted by NHS. So they've done some interviews and research mostly with sort of parents. They'd really struggled to get young people's voices because it is hard. I'll come to that in a minute. And they've done it nationally. So we had a bunch of kind of discovery stuff to build on, but we wanted to check what about that would be most applicable in this context of Gloucestershire and once with the young people that we wanted to help. So we knew from that kind of research that there were a bunch of areas that we could look at, and what we wanted to do is just see which ones would be most fruitful. So we did different kinds of research throughout the project. We started off with really early concept testing. We built a choose your own adventure in, I think, type form, and we asked people to tell us what they were choosing and why they were choosing it as they went through and why they ignored what they ignored. And in that way, we managed to narrow down, I think, 34-ish different concepts. We got that down to we got rid of 14. And then we did some refinements. So we took about 10 or 11 into the next stage. And we did some prioritization work with the young people there. And we kind of played some games, you know, pretending if you had some money, which ones would you buy? And we sort of made each of them more expensive depending on how expensive they would be to build in the real world. So from that, we got to the end of knowing, you know, what things should we build. You might have heard the terms of alpha is where you figure out how to build the right thing, and then beta is where you start to think about building the thing right. So it was all about what should we do, what about this idea is interesting to you during the alpha, and then by the time we got to beta it was lots of rounds of repeated testing. So we knew what we were building, we had to make sure we got the language right, we had to make sure we got the navigation right, we had to make sure we didn't like really alarm young people by asking them really serious questions right at the beginning, or actually is it better to get those out of the way? So we had to kind of untangle those quite gnarly questions as we went through. And throughout this process, some of the things that the team had thought would be really important turned out not to be so important, and some of the things that we hadn't really considered turned out to be the most important. So that sort of early concept testing was really, really valuable. We went into it really with an open mind. And I think the next slide is about why we built what we built and how we got there. So Rich has kind of covered this list here of like what. But one of the big findings that we had was about that process of looking for help. So the client had come to us with 3 sort of problem areas, one of which was how might we support people while they wait for treatment? How might we help people get to the right support at the right time, and how might we help people feel more in control of their journey? And I think the feeling was sort of that supporting people while they wait for treatment would be the big thing to think about, because waiting lists for NHS services, particularly CAMS, which is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, are really long and getting longer. And partly that's because that's the one that people have heard of. So if you're a young person that you're kind of responsible for is struggling, that's probably where you send them, even if it's not quite right. Whereas what we found actually is that a more useful intervention would be getting people to the right support at the right time. And our big ticket finding was about everyone in our early rounds of research that we'd spoken to they didn't start by talking to their friends or reading a book or Googling. The first thing they did when they started looking for help was to go and talk to an adult. And that took a huge amount of courage. And quite often that adult was not appropriately equipped to give them the most relevant eating disorder clinic in the local area that they were in. So they kind of sent them to CAMS, and then they got put on the waiting list, and then they got rejected once they'd been assessed because that wasn't the right service for them. Obviously that's bad for the young people, that's bad for NHS services, that's bad for their relationship with that adult. So we aimed to create something that filled that sort of conversational need, had a much lower barrier to entry than like building up the courage to go to your GP as a 14-year-old and say, you know, can you help me? I don't know what to do. So we we kind of started with a hypothesis that that might work, and we were really, really pleased when it did. I mean, you know, we had a lot of worries along the way, like, is it okay if we're asking young people to, you know, we can't get them to tell us, we can't build a conversational text bot which is that clever, or a conversational interface which is that clever. They're going to have to say, like, true, I'm struggling with my body image. But we found that they really liked that, because it meant that they didn't have to articulate the thing that was sort of hard for them over and over and over again. So that's sort of a little bit of a journey of how we got to where we got to. There's a couple of sort of logistics bits which I'll touch on quickly. Number one is where we found people, so that's on the next slide. And this was hard. Firstly, it was definitely worth it, but it was really difficult, and this photo sort of exemplifies some of the challenges we had. So, like, boys get sad too. We know that young men have got mental health challenges exactly the same way as, or maybe not exactly the same way as young women, but definitely they also have them. But teenage boys do not want to talk to even very nice researchers about their mental health. So we had to be super targeted. We did a lot of our recruitment through CAMS, so the NHS service, by sort of clinicians asking people. That didn't get us quite the mix that we were hoping for, the numbers that we were hoping for, so we supplemented it in various ways. We also went through the partner organisations that I mentioned earlier, so we managed to kind of go along to a youth group, and we took a bunch of I think there were 3 researchers who went along to that, so we split them into little mini groups, and we asked them to do some content review, because that was the stage we were at that point. And then we had a big spreadsheet of mental health adjacent charities and places that teenage boys might be. This was still in lockdown, or possibly again in lockdown by this point, so we couldn't just go and hang out at the Scout Hut, or, you know, put a poster up in the locker room of the, you know, where they run the kids' football or anything. So we had to do it all very digitally. So we just went through this list and sort of phoned people and asked them, you know, do you know anyone who would benefit from using this? You know, who would benefit from who we would benefit from hearing the perspectives of about this potential service. So I did better words than that when I phoned them, obviously. And then we also sort of used the networks that we already knew. You know, does anyone know anyone who knows any teenagers? And through that, we managed to get some class time at Stroud High School for Girls. So this was towards the end of the project. And we used it as a sort of participatory research session to kind of evaluate what needed to change, if anything, in what ways would people like to be introduced to the work, you know, what would feel the right way of talking about it. So we weren't at that point asking young people about their mental health in a classroom setting, but we sort of designed worksheets that they could use to tell us, you know, what they thought about it. And yeah, the final thing on this is, you know, it was absolutely worth it. Of course, I'm going to say that I'm a user researcher, but I would think we would have built something really different if we hadn't had all of those conversations at all of those times throughout the project. But it was hard work and it took a long time. So, you know, just plan for that. The next thing, and this is the final thing I wanted to talk about, is just some notes on researching with vulnerable groups. So there's 2 main things that we needed to be aware of. One is about not re-traumatizing our interviewees. And there was a really interesting example of a talk I went to at a conference in March 2020, and it was entitled, you know, how can we do research with sexual assault survivors? And I went along to the talk like, how can you? Yeah, that sounds really hard. And what the team there said is like, we talked to a bunch of experts and we decided we couldn't justify it. You know, we couldn't talk to those people because, you know, that's some really hard questions you've got to talk about, and, you know, the risk for the participants would just be too high. So we had a lot of conversations with the clinical team, and we used their experience and their expertise to help us shape a discussion guide that would not kind of ask people to go over their pain or their, you know, whatever has led to their struggles. So we started, for example, the first question we asked was thinking about the time where you started looking for help. what did you do? So we started at a point in their journey where they had some agency, where they could tell us about something that wasn't what they were feeling and why they were feeling it, if they were aware of that. And then we left space for them to talk about what they wanted to do. And if they just wanted to focus on the journey, then that was absolutely fine by us. You know, we got to the end of the interview and we never knew what their struggles had been, you know, which bit of CAMS they needed to be referred to. That didn't matter. What we wanted to know about was their experience of kind of looking for and getting help. And then the second thing to be aware of is protecting researchers from vicarious trauma. These are quite hard topics, and quite a lot of people have had either primary or secondary experience of kind of mental health struggles in their sort of young days, if not now. So there's some things that we did to help our researchers as well. Things like not scheduling too many interviews in a day. They're mostly about time and relationships. Those are the kind of things that we can be specific, or we can have within our control. So we always do paired research because it's just better. It's better to not only have one person there, because you can't really argue with yourself very effectively. And we really encourage that sort of like, let's make sure we've got some peer support built into this project. Let's have some debrief time after the interview. Did anything come up for you that has been hard? Are you all right to do the next one? Do we need to kind of sub someone else in? And just being aware that, you know, hearing this stuff can bring a lot of things up. And then another thing that we did for this specific group, not so much about protecting interviewees, but more about how to get the best out of young people who are potentially struggling with, for example, anxiety, or might be on the autism spectrum as one of the things that they're sort of experiencing challenges with, who might not be very comfortable in a conversation with a stranger. Is we thought about the interview format in that way as well. So we offered SMS interviews or WhatsApp interviews for people who just didn't feel comfortable having a voice-to-voice conversation. And we managed to get some kind of voices that we wouldn't have heard otherwise. We also offered phone for people who didn't want a video. And we offered to do things like sharing the questions in advance, which kind of makes me nervous as a researcher, but actually for the teenagers that we spoke to, meant that we had much more focused, much more to the point conversations, because they understood the process. I think when you're speaking to teenagers, assuming that they're going to have been sat in a room with an adult who's interested in their experience in quite an in-depth way, and expecting them to navigate that conversation can be, you can have varying levels of success, definitely. You know, by the time you get to, you know, my age, you've had job interviews, you've been left at home, you've been left in a room alone with your boyfriend's parents, and you've had to sort of try and find some conversation to have. But, you know, 13, 14-year-olds are still quite early in that process. So just make it as easy for them as possible was the other thing we tried to do. That's everything from me. If anyone wants to chat in more depth about researching vulnerable groups, then I'm very, very happy to do that. Feel free to reach out. I've got a lot more to say about it, but I'm going to hand back to Rich at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kat. I'm just checking. There's no immediate questions that came in, but I did have ones, because you talked a little bit there about obviously the challenges of vulnerable groups, and then the content matter and the subject matter being quite difficult and tricky. What do you think was the most challenging thing about designing support for young people's mental health?
That is a good question, Rich. I think the most challenging thing about designing the support was the way that clinicians talk about things and the way that young people talk about things are very, very different. And obviously the way that clinicians talk about things, they're comfortable with, they're safe. The way that young people talk about things might be more flippant. It's not been signed off. There's been no process has happened when you're talking to a teenager about what's going on for them. So the real precision of the content design, I think, was challenging in a new problem kind of a way, and it took a lot of time. It took a lot of conversations. You know, the wording in the first question, which is basically, we just need to know, like, are you at immediate risk of suicide? Because if you are, you can't use this service. You need to go to someone who can help you now. We had about, 4 weeks worth of weekly conversations about what that could be, and going backwards and forwards to young people, and then being like, I don't really understand what you're asking, because the clinical way of talking about it was too soft. and then we go back and say, well, how about this one? And we can't say that for X, Y, and Z reason. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the more surprising challenges that came up.
Yeah, I definitely remember having some of those conversations where like we worded some questions thinking this was great, and then all of a sudden being like, no, that's not good, and then being like, this is too harsh, surely, like, and then being like, no, this is exactly what it needs to be. Yeah, it was super interesting learning curve. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're going to move over to Liam. Just before we do, just a quick reminder: do feel free if you have any questions as we go along. We don't have the capacity to actually verbally ask questions during this webinar, so please do type them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We can keep better track of them, and then any that we don't answer during the session, if we run out of time, for example, we need to look anything up, we can make sure that we collate them all and send them out in the update after this. But yeah, thank you so much for that, Kat. That was just super interesting. I mean, it was amazing being part of that journey with you as well. We went through, I learned a lot for sure. And to learn about the person who had to implement it all and make it work, we'll hand over to Liam, who could dive into depth with that. So Liam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rich. Yeah, so far we've learned a lot about the incredible research that went into it and the design and making it all possible. But now I just wanted to chat a bit more about the technical, the how, as Rich said, how we actually got all of this together. So to start with, I've produced this very simplified overview of the architecture diagram of the project that we ended up building. In brief, it was just a headless CMS, content management service, built using Wagtail. And the UI was then created, this user interface for the website was created using Next.js. And we leveraged a wide array of AWS technologies, as well as making use of the Gov Notify service. And hopefully this diagram gives a light idea on how that all came together. But yeah, it can be seen that we didn't necessarily do anything groundbreaking or world-changing. This isn't some brand new idea from an infrastructure perspective. And in terms of web applications in a simple view, we can almost see that Next.js would be providing the presentation and the business logic layers, with Wagtail providing some business logic, but mostly allowing for data access and control. And finally, an Aurora database existed for us to actually store our data within. Beyond that, everything outside of the blue private subnet box is pretty much just empowering the application to be a secure, reliable service that provided the needs that we needed. Could only be contacted by, pardon me a second, by the correct locations, and yeah, trying to remain efficient. Where possible, we did leverage all of these pre-existing services. As I mentioned earlier, you can see here S3 Gov Notify, allowing us to power the application, and meanwhile using services such as AWS WAF, that's the Web Application Firewall, to help keep it secure. And from here on out, I'm just going to go a bit more into detail about some of the other, well, some of the technologies we actually used. So we've gone to the next slide. Thank you very much. So first I'm going to talk about Wagtail, and Rich has already touched on the need for interoperability and content management. So we really did need a CMS, and we went for the open source and Python-based Wagtail because we were sick of PHP. But in reality, and all seriousness, we just found it to be a great fit for us. It provided a clean and simple to use admin UI, which was very helpful in being able to produce that separation between the content and the UI itself for the website, whilst also remaining highly modifiable to engineers without us needing to write verbose code. This was also assisted by there being familiarity with Wagtail within the One Gloucestershire team, and content designers were already partially trained on how to use it. So we wanted to keep that pre-existing knowledge and really empower it. And Wagtail did provide a headless option, which was very key to us. For those not familiar, when you go for a headless CMS, you're providing that separation. You'll have a CMS take care of backend work for storing and managing data, and then use a separate section of the stack to host the user interface. But as I'd already mentioned, there was also that wonderful joy of it being so light on code. You can see a small example of a code snippet on the right-hand side of the screen. And that is really all it takes to create a new content type, which someone is able to work with. And that was really helpful in making sure that we could get new content types created quickly and test them with users quickly. And because they were as core, we were also now able to test them via code and ensure that we're getting correct content types and we weren't going to get any strange results from what was spat out. And we did also excuse me a second. Wagtail also provided an additional module called the NHS Playbook, and this was designed at creating content types or allowing content types to be created in a way that could be consumed by an existing NHS Playbook. This will make a bit more sense on the next slide, but I just want to pull attention to that now because having that module also meant it was easier for us to interpolate our data and map what was being provided by the content editor to something that we actually wanted to use and consume on the front end. But from a content editor's perspective then, like I said, it remained clean and simple. It focused more on content creation than managing, for example, menus and taxonomies that you may get in some existing CMSs or some other alternative CMSs. And it tried to keep the access to content types very clean to user, presenting a tree view that they could quickly navigate through and view access of. But what was really helpful was it provided a feature known as stream fields, which allowed editors to dynamically place content blocks together within their content. So not in a more dynamic field, so it was less structured. You could have in the example on the screen where we have subtitle, introduction, image, you could use a stream field to have 3 subtitles, 2 introductions, and 1 image in any order you provide. So we were able to enrich this with the content types of the content blocks that we'd created to allow dynamic content to be produced that would be renderable by our UI in a predictable manner. So it would not break the UI, but it would still empower the content editors to produce content which they really wanted to ensure is top notch. I will then also like to just touch on very quickly, it did provide really great account and role administration, which was very key for us because it's not only allowed for newer accounts to be spun up quickly, but also provided existing security measures such as enforced MFA, but also meant that administrators could design their teams and apply permissions in a manner which was best for them. So, for example, the person who uploads an image may need a specific role, but you do not want the person who's able to provide an image to be able to modify content in a specific group. For example, they may not be able to provide to edit the how to get help page of the application. And as the CMS grew, we were actually able to content manage the services which were provided. So thinking to the service results that Rich displayed much earlier in the demo, and you had, for example, some which could get a referral. I believe you're actually able to toggle that on and off to say, don't show a referral for this one today. And others you may have noticed had links and others did not. If you wanted your service to have a link, you could provide a link via the CMS to say, if someone sees this service, give them a link, allow them to click this link and access the service. Others, such as speaking to an individual, maybe a school counsellor, there's not a website for, so it didn't need a link. So we did not have to provide that. And I think that's all I have for Wagtail at the moment. So if we can move on to the next slide, brilliant, thank you very much. So next I'm going to talk about Next.js. Now this was what we used to build that front end of the application, the UI. And give me a moment, as we mentioned, well, as I previously mentioned, we want the headless CMS, so we want to also be able to have the UI which is prepared to handle that. And also this application needs to be able to be shared to other health boards. And what was important there is trying to identify a technology that other teams are going to be more familiar with, which led us to Next.js. Wagtail by default was using the Ninja framework, and we weren't sure if that would be as common. Next.js is built off the popular front-end library React, and due to the popularity of React, we thought it would be a very safe assumption that these engineers would be familiar with React. If someone new was to pick this project up, if a new health board wanted to pick it up, they'd probably have an easy time finding a React engineer who would be able to help with it. And due to it being in React as well, we could leverage the React playbook. And this is what allowed us to achieve the screen, as you can see on the well, there's an example on the screen here, but you've seen the UI that Rich has already demonstrated. We could inherit the React playbook to get the same look and feel as every other NHS website and apply this to the content types we were passing back from our CMS, but in such a way that now, hey, you've got a new component, it slots in a random place, and we were prepared for that, and we could just provide the styling needed, so there was less risk of us ever breaking tradition or breaking the stylistic guides of the NHS playbook, keeping it in line while still being able to stay unique and informative. And it also, one big joy about Next.js is it also allowed us to expose a REST endpoint, which was hosted, which used Express.js under the hood, I believe. And this meant that we were also able to take responses from calls that weren't necessarily our website, such as the gov.notify service, which I'll touch on in a moment. And what that meant is, as soon as a message was received, we could start using the journey in a very similar way to how the web client used the journey. So the web and text bot journeys would always go down the very similar, well, the same route ideally, just through a different medium. We did not want somebody getting different responses because they opted to use the text service over the web service or vice versa. And that was very key to us. So Next allowing us to intertwine those two services, keeping them so close together and tightly coupled, was key here. And yeah, I believe that's what I've got for next. So on to gov.notify next. So gov.notify formed the backbone of our referral journey communications. For those less familiar, gov.notify is a service provided by the government, which allows you to send various communication methods through your own service. And we had two major use cases. The first would be the sending and receiving of text messages. So the text bot, how did it work? It was quite simple, as we'd seen earlier in the diagram. So you would text a number which was actually registered under gov.notify. Gov.notify was then able to take your message and send it over to our REST endpoint through Next.js. And that would then look at the message, process it as expected, maybe take it to the next step, maybe start a referral journey, handle the data. That would then return back to gov.notify, which would then text the user back, and they would see their response. Then they would respond to that message and such until eventually they were provided with a list of results that they could see. And furthermore, then, the second use case would be emails. So once again, it was touched on earlier that we have referral possible. So certain services would allow you to self-refer yourself to them if you had received them through the support journey finder. And the only way we could make that referral would be to actually send an email to the team that would be handling that service. And gov.notify also allowed us to do this. So if someone completed one of those journey routes and said, yes, I want to be referred, and provided the information required for referral, our service is actually able to produce an email template, send that over to gov.notify, and gov.notify would then send that on our behalf over to the client, to the service, and that would start the self-referral process from that service's perspective. The other joy about using gov.notify was regarding data retention. It was really helpful in ensuring that all of our data was just in flight, that we didn't have data stored, any sensitive data. Well, we didn't want any sensitive data sat around. We didn't want to expose that risk. So by using gov.notify, we didn't have to worry about backing up in the database and then sending it back out. We could just take information, send across gov.notify, and gov.notify would not be storing that information, which is very helpful. And this also assisted then in allowing future health boards to be able to pick up the technologies. So if a new health board wanted to use this service, they would also just be able to leverage gov.notify. They could create their own gov.notify account, provide the keys required that our service would ask for, and that would be it. They would have that gov.notify connection for both emails and text referrals. They wouldn't have to worry about creating or maintaining their own email or SMS servers, which for anybody who's tried that in the past knows they can be time consuming as well as quite difficult to keep them safe and secure. So it was wonderful to be able to use gov.notify to patch that for us and use this other service to carry that burden. So yep, I think that's all from gov.notify now. So if we go on to the next slide. So finally, I just want to talk about the cloud technologies that we used. So I've mentioned a few times, one of our key tools, well, one of our key focuses was that another health board should be able to quickly pick this up and implement this code themselves. They should be able to get this service running within their own, well, within their own county. And due to that, infrastructure as code almost became a necessity. But we had to also consider that we were using AWS. We knew that we had opted to use AWS, but another health board may not necessarily be using AWS. And while we weren't able to say, oh, here's a, for example, Azure or GCP version of the application that you can spin up, what we could do was use Terraform to provide a more common language for that team. If they don't know AWS and CloudFormation, maybe they know Terraform. And by knowing Terraform, they'd still be able to spin up the AWS technologies in an AWS account, but manage using Terraform rather than having to suddenly get concerned because, hey, they're trusting something they have no knowledge about. It just might help provide that additional knowledge. But by using AWS, we were able to empower our application to be reliable, secure, and cost-effective, and tried as much as we could to just reduce the management overhead. I'm going to rattle off some of the services we've used. This is not an exhaustive list, and the list will go on and on, as it quite commonly does with the AWS cloud, in all honesty. But the first key service I wanted to bring up was Amazon ECS, that's Elastic Container Service. You may have remembered in the diagram, this was essentially that blue subnet minus the database. What this allows us to do is deploy and host our containers containing both Wagtail and Next.js and have them running in the cloud. And it was also remain scalable then, because ECS was allowing us to say, hey, we're getting too much traffic. Let's create a new instance of Next.js, which can run and take more of that burden. Let's not overload the application. It also meant that we could have rolling deployments. So for those less familiar, a rolling deployment means that, hey, I'm deploying my code. Don't take the website down. There's no reason to show this page is down for maintenance, visit back in 2 hours. It'll wait until container's been created successfully, is running, has passed its health checks, and then it'll drain the other applications. So someone could continue to use the site and just suddenly, hey, there's maybe a new widget has appeared because that was part of the latest code deployment. And I would also then like to mention, I'm going to go first in interesting order because I'll be going down next. I just want to touch on Amazon Aurora because this links very closely to ECS then, where what Amazon Aurora allowed us to do was it acted as our database. So this was our standard SQL database, but it provided point-in-time recovery, which we found to be very helpful. If something ever went wrong, then we were able to roll back to a very precise period of time, and judging by our logs, would have been able to catch, say, something went critically wrong here. So let's take an image from a bit further ago. But what was also really handy here is that we were able to produce read-only database connection strings. So if someone had access to one of these connection strings or an instance, it meant they were only able to read the database. They were not able to write. And how this ties in really nicely with Amazon ECS is within ECS, we had a version of Wagtail which was available to content editors. That is how content was created and produced. However, when we were using Next.js, that would be looking at another instance of Wagtail, which was in headless mode and only had a read connection to the database. That instance was not able to write. And what this meant is that our next instance was not looking at the same version of, the same instance of Wagtail that the content editors would be working with, helping us to provide that more separation for security purposes and reducing risk. But it also meant that there was no possible way that the container from Next would ever be able to do anything with the Wagtail instance to write to the database, providing just a wonderful security plus for us. So I'm just going to skip up and to the right a little here. For AWS code pipeline, I just want to mention first, this allowed us to deploy code for the pipeline and run, for example, our linters, our unit tests, keep it all safe and running. What we did find helpful is by using AWS code pipeline, these pipelines were purely ran in AWS land. There was no need for us to assume to make any assumptions about the client's pipeline technologies that they're choosing to use. We were instead able to say, here are the pipelines we've used. You can also use them. You can follow our process. You can run your linters. You can run your unit test. You can run a regression test. Then it can deploy to pre-prod. You can test it there, and then it can deploy finally to production automatically. And I'll rattle through the next ones very quickly because I am a bit cautious of time. AWS WAF, we were able to use this to configure our firewall. It was incredible how it was able to spin up and then be so manageable yet so strong. So what the WAF allowed us to do was we had a specific issue with images where it was thinking that certain uploads of images were malicious. So we were able to work around this whilst not compromising on security. We were able to make bespoke changes where we required. We also used Amazon DynamoDB as it allowed us to store some of the unstructured data related to the chatbot. This was done by using non-identifiable information and leveraging DynamoDB to be able to just throw out any records after a fixed period of time because we did not want anything sat around where possible. And finally, I'll just mention Amazon AWS S3, which we use for our asset storage, such as the images and the videos, the stylings. This is where they could be stored and pulled from. I will say I could rattle on, but services we've used all day. There was also ECR, Elastic Container Repository. There was ACM, Amazon Certificate Manager, Route 53, the load balancers, and IAM. But I am cautious about time, so I'll pass back to Rich now and not and calm myself down a bit.
No worries, thank you, Liam. Just a highlight as well. Liam's not been feeling too good lately, so well done. That was still an effort. It's always interesting to try and talk about the bits that actually pull this stuff together. So yeah, it was a big old system and a big old lot of work that we had to do to get this running. So yeah, thank you for that, Liam. We do have some questions, but I just wanted to finish up with what this work's actually led to now. So yeah, basically we found that the information needed at NHS One Gloucester now to access these mental health services did become easier to find and to understand. We made the service secure and resilient, as Liam mentioned there, as well. We also made it open and reusable. So any other NHS health board, so beyond NHS One Gloucester, if it happened to be Bristol and or Somerset or something, for example, they could take the code as is and very quickly spin up their own version of this with all of their own services and run it in exactly the same way. They could rebrand it slightly if they wanted to as well, changing the gloss styling out for the Bristol styling, let's say, for example, because that's where I'm based and that's why it's in my head. We've discovered recently that through user research, we revealed that around 2,577 children and young people regularly visit the site. And that's since launching it in schools. And one thing NHS Gloucester mentioned was that they found it really, really useful to advertise this service in the schools alongside other mental health awareness programs that were happening maybe in schools over certain periods. And the site has reached around 100,000 young people so far. And it's not on this version of the slides, but just to quickly mention as well that the work's also been shortlisted for the Health Service Journal and Health Tech Now award for providing a service to mental health services. So it's definitely work that I'm super proud of. It's one of the best projects I've had the opportunity to work with, not just at Maytech, but in my career. And I certainly felt it was very rewarding. So thank you as well to Kat and Liam for working on this as well. It wouldn't have been possible without you. So with that in mind, I'm going to move on to a couple of questions that we've got. So Kat, I think you could probably help out with this one. The first we had was, did we work directly with content designers during the research, and were they involved in the alpha phase?
Yes and no.
Yes, I thought that was correct. Yep.
Yeah, we worked with an amazing content designer called Amy Heap. If anyone needs one, would recommend. We didn't get her involved until we knew what we were building, and then she was a really integral part of the project team. So everything that we put in front of people, she had written, and she was also very aware, very involved in kind of knowing what we had found during the alpha phase. So it wasn't perfect because we were sort of doing the download and explaining, here's why we've got to where we've got to, and here's the things to be aware of. Here's the kind of tone of voice that we sort of have experienced being the most useful for them. But yes, the most of that work was done during beta. Yes,
yeah, I definitely remember working with Amy and panicking her slightly less when we realized that the text bot service, for example, has limited characters. So we had a very nicely defined sort of question order and set of questions that were clear and verbose and accurate, but the text bot was limited, I think, to 900 and something characters, including punctuation. So to be consistent and match the site, we had to come up with a way of how do we re-ask some of these questions, or do we need to split these again? And Amy was great at working those out, and also spent a lot of time working out the wording for services and how they should be represented and all the content through the site. Yeah. So
every single service in the database, Amy wrote the description for, so that young people would know what it does and who for and how it will help them.
And again, that had to get approved and checked and went through many iterations. So yeah, it was a process for sure. Cool. Hopefully that's helped that question. The second one is more about Wagtail. So about how we identified the blocks and modules needed for the content types, and was that part of the user research too? So I'm gonna I'll cover the first bit, but yeah, Kat, you could probably correct me on anything I get wrong. So we used, as we mentioned throughout, sort of the NHS Digital Service Manual and Design System. What that comes with is a huge list of components to use, things from buttons, radio things, checkboxes, warning callouts, notes, and these are all the styles that you see on NHS sites. And what the design system describes in a lot of detail, as well as giving you an example of what it looks like, is also when to use it, when not to use it, and then like how to use it. So I know, and yeah, Kat, this is the bit that you'll be able to jump in. We basically implemented the ones in Wagtail that we needed on the site, and I think they did come from user research when we were doing that content to work out, well, is this a warning call out, for example, that needs to go here, or is this just a note? Is this a checkbox question, or is it a radio question? And I think there was some discussion around like the sensitive content as well, like that very first question of how angry and aggressive that needed to be,
Yeah, there were we had a lot of conversations with the clinical team about the best way to approach that. Because I mentioned earlier that kind of someone who's immediately at risk of serious harm to themselves or others, really that fits you need to go to kind of the NHS content, the style book. Rich, you just said the word and I've forgotten it.
The NHS Digital Design System.
Thank you very much. That very clearly says, if you have to take immediate action, it needs to be red. If you have to immediately go to A&E rather than your GP, it needs to be red with a black background. If it's just a note, then it needs to be yellow. And we sort of followed that, and we put it in front of young people, and they were really turned off by, what we sort of thought was probably immediate action and at a higher than GP level. Like, this is the crisis team that we're suggesting you call. So we used the red and black, and it really did not go down well. I think something interesting is that we came into the project with a lot of people saying, oh, we want to make it friendly, we want to make the design really like kid friendly and approachable, and actually all of the young people we spoke to, well, most of them who expressed an opinion anyway, it's very easy. Everyone we spoke to said this, but the NHS style guide actually tested really well. It felt not patronising, it felt safe, it felt reassuring, it felt legitimate. But all of those really important things that you need to know when you're kind of 14, 17, 11 and looking for help. So yeah, we did sort of deviate ever so slightly from that style guide in a couple of cases, but it was always for research-based reasons.
Great, thanks, Kat. Yeah, I was going to mention that was it could be quite heavy to see a sort of an NHS-based site, but I guess that kind of familiarity and knowing that it's a legitimate thing possibly helped. You mentioned that it tested well with young people. We just had another question come in actually, which was really interesting. I think we've got time to try and respond. I think it's the content can be quite heavy around mental health. Did you have any help in place for yourselves on how to deal with that? I can go first if you want. If you have a think. I'll say no, nothing immediately direct. I think fortunately for myself and sort of the engineering side of the team, we were kind of tangentially involved with user research, so mainly catching up with Kat and her team about what had been found and what we were designing. So it was more about making sure the content was there and that it was in place. And I think one thing we did have a mentor on the team throughout, is just that how important this service is and how much it's going to help people at the end. So when times did get tough and there were late nights and there were things like that, just reminding ourselves of how important it was is what helped me to sort of get through it. But fortunately, I was a little bit more removed from the immediate kind of harder discussions, I think, which possibly helped me with that. But yeah, definitely kept in mind who we were doing this for. The user groups were definitely the forefront during this development for me. Kat, was that the same for you, or?
We have more of a process. We have a whole guidebook on, sensitive topics and protecting researchers and participants, which I touched on a little bit earlier, so I won't say too much on it here. But yes, we did have support available. We've got counselling available through the kind of our standard employee health thingy scheme. But also I'm one of the leads here, so I'm sort of responsible for team dynamics and kind of modelling what is and isn't appropriate behaviour. And so one thing that we always do in sort of research teams is just to be really open about, this is my previous experience with this in this field, and I'm happy sharing it, so feel free, you're welcome to if you need to, and you don't have to. Here's some other support that's available. And also having those conversations, like I found that really tough, actually. That was really hard. So just a little bit of time to decompress afterwards and just acknowledge in a safe space that this stuff is hard. Really helped kind of get to the end of the day not carrying a bunch of heavy stuff. Sometimes we heard really sad stories. There are a few songs I couldn't listen to for a couple of months after we finished the project, but mostly that sort of peer support and open, safe space for saying, that was hard, actually, I could use could you be interviewer for the next rounds, was really helpful to the research team.
No, thanks, Kat. I think, thank you for sharing. That's actually thinking about it more now, that was more what it was like on our team as well, was just that we just shared a lot and talked a lot and kind of just worked together and worked in pairs, and there was constant kind of discussion, and we had a lot of meetings together and shared group activities and fun times and things as well, just to help. And yes, as you mentioned, sort of counseling things were available if we did need it through Maytech and things. But again, just remembering who this was for and why we were building it is certainly what will stay with me. We have reached time. In fact, we've gone slightly over. So as I said, there will be a feedback form going out after this. If there's any feedback on whether it be content or more things that you'd like to see, or if you want to hear more about this or more specific things around certain areas, more about the tech or more about user research or more about just the project in general or what's in the future, do let us know. If there's any other questions, do let us know that way too. And otherwise, you can also stay in touch with us at our various websites there or our Twitter accounts, Maytech and Mace and Menter. So thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Liam and Kat, for discussing the bits that you did. That was fantastic. And Anna as well, who's been running the slides behind the scene. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and take care.